Hey there, I'm so glad you're tuning in today. What if I told you that behind the smooth operation of your favorite company, things might not be as perfect as they seem? Imagine being a CEO, thinking everything's under control, only to walk into your own call center and uncover a whole different story. This is exactly what happened to Noah, and what he discovered was nothing short of shocking. But instead of ignoring it, he decided to take action. Stick around, because what happens next is a masterclass in leadership and real change. You won't want to miss it. Noah Bennett had always envisioned Atlas Financial Solutions as more than just another corporate giant. What started as a small financial services firm had grown into a nationwide company providing customer support for banking and insurance clients. With 10 call centers spread across multiple states, the company was thriving, at least on paper. But lately, something felt off. Reports from upper management painted a picture of steady profits and growing efficiency. But when Noah looked closer, he saw alarming trends. Customer complaints had nearly doubled in the past year, employee turnover was at an all-time high, and productivity numbers, while still solid, weren't as strong as they once were. At first, he chalked it up to the challenges of a growing company, but then came the negative online reviews from both customers and former employees. Customers frustrated with rushed service, employees voicing their exhaustion, micromanagement, and toxic work environments. Noah brought his concerns to his district manager, Grant, but Grant simply waved it off. Call centers are high-pressure environments, people come and go, it's normal, we're running at peak efficiency. But Noah wasn't convinced. Efficiency shouldn't come at the cost of quality service or employee well-being. Then came the final push. A longtime customer emailed Noah directly, detailing a horrible experience at one of the company's busiest call centers. The customer had been cut off mid-call multiple times, forced to repeat themselves to different agents, and in the end their issue wasn't even resolved. But what really stood out was what the customer witnessed: employees being treated like machines, timed down to the second, and spoken to with little to no respect by their managers. Noah realized he had two choices: trust the reports or see the truth himself. He chose the latter. If something was truly broken within his company, he needed to witness it firsthand. He made a bold decision: go undercover as a new employee. No CEO privileges, no corporate meetings, just him, a headset, and an inside look at the reality behind his company's numbers. It was time to find out what was really happening inside Atlas Financial Solutions. Dressed in a wrinkled button-up, slightly scuffed dress shoes, and glasses he didn't actually need, Noah Bennett walked into the Atlas Financial Solutions Phoenix call center as just another new hire. To complete his disguise, he'd even let his usually well-groomed hair grow out a little, giving him a more unkempt, forgettable look. No one gave him a second glance. Why would they? With hundreds of employees rotating through shifts, it wasn't uncommon for a new face to appear every week. To them, he was just Eric Carter, another trainee looking for a paycheck. From the moment he stepped inside, Noah could feel the tension. The open office space was lined with rows of cubicles, each filled with agents hunched over computers, headsets firmly in place, voices blending into a monotonous hum of scripted customer responses. The air was thick with stress and exhaustion, not the kind that comes from a busy, productive workplace, but the kind that builds up in an environment where burnout is routine and morale is low. His training was rushed and impersonal. Just an hour of watching outdated training videos before he was thrown onto the floor with a headset. There was no introduction to the company culture, no welcome speech, just an expectation to start taking calls and keep the queue moving. His supervisor, a man named Mason Tate, barely looked up from his clipboard as he muttered, "Just keep your talk time low and don't transfer calls unless you have to." That was it. No encouragement, no explanation of company values, just a warning to prioritize speed over actual customer service. As Noah settled into his station, plugging in his headset, he realized something. This wasn't just a job for most people here. It was survival. The lifeless expressions, the whispers of frustration, the defeated posture of employees glued to their screens. This wasn't the company he had built. Something had gone very, very wrong. Noah had barely been on the floor an hour before he started seeing the cracks in the system. Supervisors paced the aisles like prison guards, watching the clock more than they watched their employees. The entire office ran on metrics, not service. Average call times, resolution speed, and queue clearance were all that mattered. Customers weren't being helped, they were being rushed off the phone as fast as possible. A woman at the desk next to him, Deanna, a middle-aged employee with years of experience, sighed heavily as she ended a call. Under her breath, she muttered, "Doesn't matter if you fix the problem as long as you hit the numbers." Noah turned slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked casually. She glanced around before lowering her voice. "They don't care if we actually help people anymore. Ever since Mason took over, it's all about speed. You're better off giving a half answer and moving on than actually solving an issue. It's a numbers game, and we're the ones paying for it." As he listened, Noah realized how deep the damage ran. Employees were terrified of falling behind on metrics because they knew what came next: a private scolding in Mason's office, or worse, termination. He overheard a young agent Jordan being pulled aside after miscalculating his break by 2 minutes. Mason's voice was sharp, but quiet enough that only those close by could hear. "You think extra time is free? If you can't follow the schedule, I'll find someone who can." Jordan paled, swallowing hard before mumbling an apology and returning to his desk, shoulders hunched in defeat. Worse than the pressure was the complete lack of empathy from management. Supervisors like Mason weren't just demanding, they were cold, dismissive, and unyielding. The job was already stressful, dealing with frustrated customers all day, but having a toxic leadership team that treated employees like machines made it unbearable. Noah saw agents mute their calls just to take deep breaths and collect themselves. Others rubbed their temples after being berated for a bad call. And then there were those who had simply shut down, speaking in robotic monotones, completely drained of any care for the job. It was clear now, Atlas Financial's problem wasn't just a few bad employees or slow service. It was a company-weighted crisis, created by leaders who saw their people as numbers, not human beings. Noah clenched his jaw. This wasn't how a company should operate, this wasn't how people should be treated. And the worst part, it was happening under his nose. Noah had seen enough to know things were bad, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The moment that pushed him over the edge came late in the afternoon, when the stress in the call center was at its peak. The queue was flooded, supervisors hovered like vultures, and employees were scrambling to clear calls as fast as possible, not to help, but to meet the impossible metrics set by management. That's when he heard it. Just a few desks away, a young woman, Haley, her voice trembling, pleaded with her supervisor, "Please, I just need one day. My son's in the hospital, I've already arranged coverage. I just need to be with him." Her hands clenched into fists on her lap, her knuckles turning white as she waited for a response. The supervisor, Mason, didn't even look up from his clipboard. His voice was flat, completely devoid of empathy. "We're understaffed. You already used your sick days this quarter. Not my problem, Haley. Either you work your shift, or you don't work here at all." Noah froze, his fingers tightening around his headset. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. This wasn't just strict policy, this was cruelty. A mother was being denied time to be with her sick child, not because there was no solution, but because Mason didn't care enough to try. Haley sat there for a moment, completely still, as if the words had knocked the air out of her. Then, without another word, she turned back to her screen, her eyes red, her voice hollow, as she answered her next call. Noah felt his stomach twist. This was more than a bad workplace. This was a place where people were being stripped of their dignity. It wasn't just about efficiency anymore. It was about control, power, and keeping employees too afraid to push back. Now that he was looking for it, he saw more. Another employee, Lewis, had just asked for an extra bathroom break, only to be pulled aside and given a warning for wasting company time. A few desks away, Deanna, the older agent who had been with the company for years, rubbed her temples as a supervisor berated her for a low call resolution rate, despite her trying to actually help the customer. Noah couldn't take it anymore. His blood boiled as he watched people being crushed under the weight of impossible expectations, all while Mason and his team sat back, enforcing rules without humanity. He knew he couldn't break cover yet. He needed to see just how deep this rot went. But one thing was already certain. This was not the company he had built, and tomorrow, Mason was going to find out exactly who he had been mistreating. Noah barely slept that night. The weight of what he had witnessed in his own company pressed down on him. Employees were terrified to speak up, overworked to exhaustion, and treated like disposable cogs in a machine. This wasn't just a single bad manager, this was systemic. The entire call center operated on fear, and it had been running that way for far too long. The next morning, as he walked back into the building, he paid even closer attention. The signs had been there all along. The exhaustion in employees' eyes, the robotic way they answered calls, the way they flinched whenever a supervisor walked by. The few who still tried to genuinely help customers were the ones most at risk, constantly penalized for low efficiency, despite actually solving problems. And then there were employees like Mason's favorites, the ones who gamed the system, cut corners, and followed his toxic leadership without question. They weren't just tolerated, they were rewarded. As Noah took his seat at his workstation, he overheard a hushed conversation between two agents behind him. "Did you hear about Haley?" one whispered. "She called out anyway. I think she got fired." "Not surprised," the other sighed. "They want us to believe we're replaceable. That's why they don't promote anyone. No point in staying long-term here." Noah clenched his jaw. It was worse than he thought. This wasn't just a high-turnover workplace. It was a revolving door, designed to break people down and replace them the moment they cracked. Good employees like Haley were pushed out, while the ones who thrived under Mason's iron rule stayed and climbed the ranks. It suddenly clicked. This was why his company's numbers looked fine on paper. The profits were steady because Mason and his kind had been squeezing every last bit of energy from their employees, covering up the damage by replacing burned-out staff with new hires just as fast as they quit. The data reports hadn't captured this, because no one in upper management had been looking beyond the spreadsheets. Noah leaned back in his chair, staring at the call queue on his screen. He had seen enough. This wasn't a few bad apples. It was a culture that had been allowed to fester and grow. But now it was time to burn it down. Noah had spent enough time watching his employees suffer. Now it was time to act. That morning, he walked into the call center, not as Eric Carter, the quiet new hire, but as Noah Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Communications. Gone were the cheap button-up and khakis. Today, he wore his usual sharp suit, his hair neatly styled, exuding the authority that Mason and the other managers had never questioned. Until now. The moment he stepped onto the floor, the energy in the room shifted. Employees who had barely noticed him before now whispered among themselves, their eyes widening as they recognized his face. Some supervisors, sensing something was off, straightened their postures, suddenly aware of his presence. Mason, however, remained at his usual post by the supervisor's desk, flipping through call metrics with a smug expression, completely unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. Noah walked straight toward Mason, stopping just a few feet away. "Mason." His voice was calm, but the weight of authority behind it made the room go silent. Mason frowned, finally looking up, but his irritation quickly shifted to confusion. Then, recognition flickered in his eyes, followed immediately by panic. "Mr. Sterling?" Mason's voice was forced, his usual arrogant demeanor replaced by unease. "That's right," Noah said, crossing his arms. "And I've spent the last week working under you, watching how you run this place." The entire floor fell into stunned silence. Employees who had been too afraid to speak out before now stared openly, realizing exactly who had been sitting among them all along. Mason swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the clipboard in his hands. "Sir, I had no idea you were here," Mason stammered, trying to regain control. "If you wanted to see how things operate, you could have just—" "I wanted to see the truth," Noah interrupted, his voice sharp, unwavering. "Not the polished reports, not the cherry-picked data, the truth. And what I found was disgusting." Mason opened his mouth to protest, but Noah didn't let him. "I watched you berate employees for needing basic human necessities. I watched a mother beg for time off to be with her sick child while you dismissed her like she was nothing. I watched people scared to take a bathroom break because they knew you'd punish them. And worst of all, you did it all without a second thought." Mason was speechless, his face pale. Noah took a step closer, lowering his voice so that only Mason could hear. "You're done." Mason inhaled sharply. "Wait, sir, please." "You're fired, effective immediately. Pack your things and leave. Security will escort you out." Mason stood frozen for a long moment, his arrogance shattered. But Noah wasn't interested in hearing excuses. As security approached to remove him, Noah turned to face the employees, the very people Mason had mistreated for years. "Things changed today." His voice rang through the call center, strong, unwavering, and filled with the promise of something better. With Mason gone, Noah knew that firing one toxic manager wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. The damage ran deeper than just one person. It was a culture that had been allowed to fester under poor leadership. That ended today. Standing at the center of the call floor, he turned to face his employees, many of whom still looked stunned by what had just unfolded. "I know that words alone won't fix what's been happening here," Noah said, his voice steady but firm. "So I'm not just here to talk. I'm here to act." The first thing he addressed was employee treatment. Effective immediately, sick leave policies will be reviewed. No one should have to choose between their job and their family. He looked at Haley, the young mother who had been denied time off for her son. "That includes you. Take the time you need, and when you return, your job will be waiting." Haley's eyes widened in shock, a visible weight lifting from her shoulders. Next, he tackled break policies. "Bathroom breaks will no longer be monitored like a stopwatch. We are not machines, and I refuse to let anyone be treated like one." Several employees exchanged relieved glances. Finally, they were being heard. Then, he addressed the work environment. Customer service is important, but it's not just about speed. It's about solutions. No more cutting off callers just to hit a quota. From now on, we fix problems, not just rush through them. A murmur of cautious optimism spread through the team. Finally, Noah turned to leadership. Moving forward, every supervisor and manager in this company will be retrained. Leadership is about supporting your team, not controlling them. Anyone who doesn't meet this standard will be replaced. The room was quiet for a beat. Then, for the first time, employees started to clap. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was real, a sign that hope was returning. Noah nodded. "This is just the beginning, but I promise you, things will never go back to the way they were." And with that, the real work began. With immediate changes in motion, Noah knew his work wasn't done. Fixing one call center was just the start. If these issues had gone unnoticed here, how many other locations were suffering under the same toxic leadership? It was time to rebuild the entire company from the ground up. His first major step was holding management accountable. Noah ordered a full audit of all call center locations, reviewing employee turnover rates, customer complaints, and internal reports. Any manager found mistreating employees or prioritizing speed over real solutions was removed immediately. No more excuses, no more unchecked authority. Next, he implemented a leadership retraining program. Being a manager isn't about controlling people, it's about supporting them, he told his executive team. Every manager was required to complete intensive training in employee relations, conflict resolution, and customer service best practices. Anyone unwilling to adapt to these new standards was let go. To ensure employees felt safe speaking up, Noah introduced an anonymous reporting system. No longer would complaints be swept under the rug by bad managers. Instead, reports went directly to corporate leadership, including Noah himself. Employees could now voice concerns without fear of retaliation. But the biggest change? Fixing company culture. Noah made it clear that this wasn't just about efficiency, it was about people. He restructured performance metrics to reward problem solving, not just call volume. Employees who went the extra mile to help customers or support their coworkers were recognized and given opportunities for advancement. To reinforce these shifts, Noah conducted surprise visits across locations, ensuring that the new standards weren't just temporary changes, but permanent expectations. He also began holding regular town hall meetings with employees, giving them a direct line to corporate leadership and ensuring that no one ever felt unheard again. The results? A complete transformation. Within months, employee satisfaction soared, turnover rates dropped, and customer complaints decreased. Employees who once felt like disposable machines now felt valued, supported, and motivated to perform at their best. Noah had set his company back on course. But this time, he wasn't just running a business. He was leading a movement. One that proved real success isn't built on numbers alone. It's built on people. As the months passed, Noah began to see the fruits of his labor. The changes he had implemented were taking root, and for the first time in a long time, there was a real sense of hope throughout the company. The toxic culture that had once poisoned the call centers was now being replaced by one of support, collaboration, and respect. Employees who had once felt isolated, overworked, and unappreciated were now coming together as a cohesive team. Supervisors no longer hovered over their employees with fear tactics, but instead offered mentorship and guidance. There was a new energy in the air, a renewed sense of purpose, and a palpable excitement among employees who knew they were part of something bigger. Noah made sure to continue engaging directly with employees at every level, ensuring that the changes he had set in motion were genuine and not just temporary fixes. Through open conversations, feedback sessions, and regular visits, Noah showed his commitment to keeping his company's values at the forefront. He remained grounded in his belief that employees were the backbone of any company, and that investing in their well-being and development was the key to sustainable success. Even at the corporate level, employee morale began to rise as they saw their leaders lead by example. The once stagnant and overwhelmingly negative atmosphere had evolved into one where employees felt empowered and supported in their roles. And most importantly, customers began to notice the change. The once high volume of complaints started to decrease, and positive reviews began to pour in. Customers no longer felt like just another number. They felt heard, cared for, and appreciated. This was exactly the kind of company Noah had always envisioned. As he walked through the call center, watching his employees work with renewed vigor and confidence, Noah knew that this was just the beginning. The company had been restored, but the journey of growth, trust, and continuous improvement would be ongoing. For the first time in years, Noah truly felt that the company was in the right hands, and the future looked brighter than ever. The story of Noah's undercover experience in his call center teaches us a powerful lesson about leadership and the importance of company culture. As Noah discovered, no business can thrive when its employees feel undervalued, overworked, or afraid. Leadership isn't about enforcing strict rules or pushing for profits at the expense of people. It's about creating an environment where employees feel supported, heard, and respected. By taking the time to observe his employees firsthand, Noah was able to recognize the toxic environment that had taken root, and more importantly, he acted swiftly to make necessary changes. The most important takeaway is that businesses are built on the people within them, and when you invest in your employees' well-being and growth, they will reciprocate with hard work and loyalty. Noah's commitment to transparency, accountability, and fostering an inclusive culture allowed his company to not only recover, but to thrive once again. The changes he made weren't just about improving profits. They were about creating a company that values both its customers and its employees equally. The true measure of leadership is not just about business success, but about empowering the people who make that success possible.